Our week-long series, Oil Sands at a Crossroads, continues, and this is the controversial development of Canada's oil sands. As with many of Canada's natural resources, the oil sands were discovered by the Aboriginal people who first inhabited the land. They used a tar-like substance to waterproof clothing and canoes. Commercial development began in the 60s. In 1967, Suncor Energy constructed a mine north of Fort Murray. It began producing 30,000 barrels a day. The second mine began almost 20 years later in 1978. That was a private-public venture which included the Alberta and Canadian governments. That plant produced 125,000 barrels a day. Since then, that area has taken off. By 2011, oil sands production hit 1.7 million barrels every day, and that's growing every single year. Now, one of the main issues is how to get all that oil to the buyers. And one way is the controversial Keystone Pipeline, which has grabbed headlines in the States, but the Canadian government is backing other pipeline projects to reach Europe and Asia. Kristiaan Yeo now joins us from Toronto with more on this. Kristiaan?
Yeah, Phil, the oil sands is a huge topic here, a hot topic. It already generates a massive amount of jobs for Canada and generates huge revenues for the federal government. There are concerns, though, about the environmental impact of this project. And the sands have been sold to the public as an economic benefit, as the key to a new golden era for the country. Now, despite those environmental concerns about this country's record and the cleanness of this oil, the government really has so much riding on the oil sands project that it has no choice but to continue travelling around the world touting this oil for buyers. Passing over this vast, largely unspoiled country, it's hard to believe Canada is one of the world's leading energy powerhouses. Whether it's coal, uranium, natural gas or crude oil, it's here and the government has big plans to use it.
Canada is one of the largest producers in the world, and in almost every case with some of the largest reserves in the world. So whatever the energy mix of the future is, I tell people Canada will be a major provider.
With enough reserves to last more than 150 years, oil from the Alberta tar sands is Canada's most bankable commodity. During a 25-year span, the Canadian Energy Research Institute projects that the oil sands will add about $2 trillion to the Canadian economy in tax, contracts and jobs. But with current pipelines at full capacity, there's a bottleneck to growth. As well as the Keystone XL extension, which would run from Alberta to the Gulf of Mexico, pipelines are planned for Canada's east and west coast. The Enbridge Northern Gateway project is a twin pipeline system that would help deliver oil to emerging Asian markets, while TransCanada Corporation plans to build the Energy East pipeline, which would allow for shipping across the Atlantic. To speed up the process, the government has put more power in the hands of ministers. According to environmentalists, this means that committees which look at the impact of the plans can now be legally ignored. Groups like Greenpeace want Canada to abandon fossil fuels entirely.
We want to move off oil as quickly as possible. And we think actually rather than investing in expansion of the tar sands or in shale oil in the US, we should be investing in greener alternatives to fight climate change, all other forms of pollution, and just long-term human security.
But others say Canada simply cannot survive without developing the oil sands deposits.
We'd be looking at higher oil prices, therefore higher gasoline prices. We'd also be looking at communities within Western Canada that no longer have sort of the economic drivers there to sustain themselves.
Sustaining or not, many communities have expressed concerns about the impact of rampant energy exploration. To calm those fears, Canada's Natural Resources Minister has promised to come down hard on polluters and protect the Indigenous people.
A key pillar of our plan is to uphold our moral and constitutional obligations to Canada's First Nations and other Aboriginal peoples.
But there was also a defiant warning to opponents. The oil sands project will continue.
Canadian resource development and export, including from the oil sands, will continue, Keystone or no Keystone. And this is important to understand. Anyone who equates the rejection of Keystone XL with some kind of body blow to the oil sands is just plain wrong.
And there is an economic argument for sending this oil further afield. Canada sells to the US at a lower price per barrel, and it would get far more selling to Europe and Asia. So while the White House considers its verdict on Keystone, oil firms and the government here already set their sights elsewhere, Phil.
Kristiaan, this has been such a politically heated battle, but it's also been very emotional as well. In your research, how do the Canadians there feel about these sort of new pipelines as they go across its lands?
To give you an idea of how divisive the oil sands project is, and Keystone specifically, a poll last week found that 42% of Canadians are in support of Keystone, up against 41% that oppose it. Now that's up slightly from spring, when just 38% were in favour of the Keystone pipeline. What's changed since then? We've had a major rail crash involving oil cars. Lac-Mégantic really laid bare the dangers. And rail derailments here involving oil cars are a regular occurrence. But pipelines here are by no means perfect either. And the public broadcaster CBC reported this week that the number of safety incidents involving the pipelines here has doubled in a decade, more than 1,000 such incidents in 10 years. So a lot of questions remain about the impact of this oil, regardless of how it's transported, Phil.
All those questions, and it just seems like there's no clear-cut answers. Kristiaan Yeo, thank you very much.